they've had some success, but not enough. I think it's really hard to tell the exact numbers, but I've heard about 50 of the incoming missiles that came in a day or two ago. They were able to shoot down, but that means 50% got in, and we've seen the destruction from that. So the need for air defense is always there. It's always been there. And they need some air defense systems that are more than just the so-called man pads that an individual soldier would fire from his shoulder. They're going to need some higher-end, more sophisticated air defense, which not many allies have. The U.S. has some, but we don't have enough either. So this is going to be a long-term need that won't be filled for a while.
Yeah, and that's why the FT, the Financial Times, is saying, and I quote, NATO allies are struggling to secure sufficient air defense systems to meet Ukraine's demands for additional support. So in practice, what does that mean? And why would they be struggling to secure sufficient air defense systems?
Well, I think, we were able, and the UK was part of this, U.S., others, to provide the tactical air defense that protected troops on the ground. And we were able to provide a lot of that beginning in February, along with the anti-tank missiles, the Javelins and others that were sent in, stuff that you all sent in as well. But this other air defense that is better for ballistic missiles, the Patriot system is what the U.S. has, UK and others have other systems as well. This is harder because it's not just a shoulder-fired rocket. This is actually a system of vehicles and radars it's complicated.
Is this the kind of thing that the Israelis use on the Iron Dome?
No, Iron Dome used to have Patriot part of it, but the Israelis have made their own. It's called the Arrow. They've got their own air defense systems, and they're not willing to provide any to Ukraine right now. I think they're worried about their relationship with Russia concerning Iran and Syria. So they've got a whole other game going. But right now, to provide something on par with what Israel has or with the U.S. Patriot system, it's going to take a while to get it there. And so hopefully maybe we can find a workaround that can get some more highly sophisticated, high-altitude air defense, which is what they need to take out ballistic missiles.
It's interesting, Jim, you say that the Israelis are reluctant to supply Ukraine, which has a Jewish president, with these weapons, with these defensive weapons, because they're worried about their relationship with Russia. Just how fiendishly difficult are these alliances from your point of view, especially as you're a former Deputy Secretary of Defense for NATO and for Europe?
Well, in terms of Israel, they have they put, like many nations, they put their concerns first. And for Israel, their concern is what's happening in their region, particularly with Iran, particularly in Syria. And the Russians are calling a lot of the shots in Syria right now. So they've got special concerns in terms of their bilateral relationship with Russia. They haven't contributed a lot to Ukraine. Israel isn't in Europe. In Europe, among the allies, all the allies have provided something. Some are more reluctant, like Hungary. Others are in with both feet, UK, Poland, US, the Balts. Nations act based on their own interests first. And for most of us, our interest in Europe right now is getting the Russians out of Ukraine, helping Ukraine do that. But not every nation has that as an interest, and so we have to work with those nations to show them that they also have an interest in this. But for Israel, that's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah. I was talking to Lord Malloch Brown, the former Deputy General Secretary of the United Nations, and I was talking about the transition from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, and the Chinese and the Russians saying that alliances have changed and this is a watershed. I'm wondering what the sell is to countries like Israel, who have decided that their interests don't lie with Ukraine's at this point. They're concerned about the possible ramifications of sending them weapons. How do you persuade a country like Israel? How do you persuade countries that may feel similarly restricted in their room for maneuver?
Well, India is an example of that, too. I think a lot of times you're not going to persuade them through words, through logic, this type of thing. You have to either take care of the issue that is what's bothering them give them alternative approaches, that type of thing. I think you have to come up with ways to mitigate what their concerns are. And if you can't do that, words alone aren't going to do it. And if you can't come up with a way to mitigate the problem or to come up with a workaround for the problem that they have, then there's going to be no convincing them, and you just have to move on.
Mm-hmm. There are some countries, particularly in Africa, who have bristled at being essentially threatened by the US, that if they don't step in line and follow the G7, the EU and Western countries in their attitude towards Russia, there may be consequences later on. We're talking about trade, we're talking about bilateral relations, etc. If that were the case, would that be a misstep by the US?
It'd be a horrible misstep. We don't do that kind of thing. We don't coerce. We don't threaten. We don't blackmail. I've worked this for 30 some odd years. I've never seen us do it once, although I won't go out and say that's never happened. But typically that's not what the U.S. does. That hurts us. At the end of the day, that undercuts the United States. It undercuts the U.K. It undercuts the West. It undercuts what all of us have tried to create after World War II, which was an international system where that kind of thing is held to a minimum. So, nations at the end of the day, whether in Africa or elsewhere, if they're going to follow Russia and we can't convince them otherwise one way or another, then that's where we are.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a raft of stories, including one headline from Foreign Policy. This is from a couple of months ago, Western allies pressure African countries to condemn Russia, but too much pressure could backfire. I'm not making this up, you see.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're not. But it's just, I think when they're talking about pressure, it's more going in there and trying to convince them with words. But we wouldn't threaten them, and we wouldn't try to coerce them. So, and I know that's not what you meant, but just for your audience, that's something that I think U.S., U.K., others in the West, that's not something that works very well for us. It usually causes blowback on us, but we do pressure, we do twist some arms, but we're not going to use other kinds of tactics.
Right. Okay. And when you twist arms, is it usually financial? Do you think, as well as just the moral case?
No, it's usually just trying to convince them with logic, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Uh-huh. And when it comes to any possible wriggle room, any possible diplomatic solution, because a lot of our listeners do say you guys need to talk not just about the military but also about possible diplomatic solutions. Where do you see any chink of light, any hope? Perhaps in the shuttle diplomacy of President Erdogan, who I believe is visiting Putin this week, President Erdogan of Turkey.
Yeah, that's not gonna. That's a whole different game. Yep. That's Erdogan and Putin, and that's a whole different game. In terms of diplomacy and talking our way out of this and coming up with something other than war, there's no glimmer for that right now. It's these two countries are dug in deep. They're going to fight it out, and until there's some type of corner that is turned on the battlefield, there's not going to be any advance diplomatically.
Every so often we get intelligence, including sometimes by the head of the UK, we could call it Secret Intelligence Service, even though he's no longer secret. And we hear that there is trouble in the Kremlin, there are concerns, Putin is being weakened, and lots of people here in the UK and probably elsewhere will be encouraged by that. But at the same time, we've heard this time and again since February. How credible are these reports, would you say?
I think it's credible that he's feeling a lot of pressure from inside the Kremlin, from the oligarchs, from the military hierarchy, from the secret services, the intelligence services. There's a lot of pressure on him to be successful, to not embarrass Russia or to threaten their own livelihood. And so he's under a lot of pressure. And we'll have to see what happens in the coming months if things turn really bad for Putin. And these oligarchs come to him and say it's time to end this, which could happen. But right now we're not seeing it yet, but it could.